Have you ever stopped for a moment, not just out of curiosity but with real attention, and asked yourself how something as small, dry, and seemingly lifeless as a grain of rice can become part of a large-scale production system designed to feed thousands of chickens at the exact same time, every single day, in a continuous and carefully controlled cycle? At first, the idea may sound simple, almost too simple to carry any real complexity: rice, water, and time. But once you step inside the real process and begin to observe each stage closely, you realize that this is not just about growing feed. It is about controlling transformation, from the very first moment the grain is selected to the final moment it is consumed. Everything begins with dry rice, stored in large quantities, uniform in appearance, hard in texture, completely inactive on the surface, yet full of hidden potential that will only be unlocked under the right conditions. Before anything begins to grow, the grain must be carefully prepared, because the consistency of the raw material directly affects the efficiency, quality, and reliability of the entire system. The rice is cleaned, filtered, and sorted, removing broken grains, dust, and impurities, ensuring that only strong, uniform grains move forward into the next stage, where the real transformation begins. This stage is important because it removes variability, and in a system designed to feed thousands of chickens, variability is the enemy of scale. Once the rice is selected, it moves into the soaking stage, where the grains are submerged in water for a controlled period of time, allowing moisture to penetrate the outer shell and activate the internal biological structure that makes germination possible. At this point, the process is still visually subtle. Nothing dramatic is happening on the surface, but inside each grain, something has already changed. The structure softens, the internal systems activate, and the grain begins preparing for growth. After soaking, the rice is removed and transferred into trays, where it is spread evenly across a flat surface, ensuring that every grain has equal access to water, air, and space for development. These trays are not simple containers. They are engineered to allow controlled drainage, airflow, and moisture retention, creating the perfect environment for uniform germination. When the trays are arranged into long rows and stacked into vertical layers, the system begins to expand, transforming from a small operation into a structured environment capable of producing feed at scale. Now the germination phase begins, and this is where the transformation becomes visible. Water is applied again, not continuously, but in carefully timed cycles that maintain moisture, while allowing oxygen to circulate through the structure. This balance between water and air is critical because too much water can suffocate the roots, while too little can slow the entire process. Gradually, the first visible changes begin to appear. Small white roots emerge from the base of each grain, followed by thin green shoots rising upward. What was once dry, inactive grain becomes a living, growing surface that expands day by day. And when this happens across hundreds of trays at once, the visual impact becomes powerful. Rows of sprouted rice stretching across the space, layer after layer, all growing together in a synchronized pattern. As the process continues, the system reveals itself as something much larger than a simple sequence of steps, because multiple stages are happening simultaneously within the same space, creating a continuous flow rather than a start and stop process. Some trays are just entering the system after soaking, still in early activation, while others are already developing roots and shoots, and further ahead, entire sections are fully grown and ready for harvest. This overlap is what allows the system to scale efficiently, because it is never waiting for one batch to finish before starting another. Everything is always moving forward. The irrigation system continues to operate in repeated cycles, distributing water evenly across all trays, ensuring that moisture levels remain stable without oversaturating the structure. At the same time, airflow moves continuously through the system, maintaining a balanced environment, preventing excessive humidity in one area and ensuring that every layer receives the same conditions. Every variable is controlled, every condition is monitored, every stage is repeated with precision. As time passes, the transformation becomes more defined. The roots grow thicker and begin to interconnect, forming a dense base that holds the entire structure together, while the shoots extend upward, creating a uniform green layer across each tray. What was once a collection of individual grains is now a single interconnected mat of sprouted rice, dense, moist, and structurally stable. This is where the process becomes visually satisfying because the transformation is no longer subtle, it is complete and clearly visible. And still, the system continues without pause. Because while one tray reaches full development, another is halfway through the process and another has just begun, all operating within the same cycle. This continuous rotation is what allows the system to produce feed at scale, ensuring that thousands of chickens can be fed every single day. However, timing remains critical. There is a precise moment when the sprouted rice reaches its ideal condition for feeding, when it is fresh, dense, and nutritionally optimal. Too early, and it lacks structure. Too late, and it changes composition. So the system must move forward at exactly the right time. Now the process begins to shift in a more visible and dynamic way, because what was previously a controlled and almost quiet phase of growth now transitions into organized movement, where the system reveals how everything connects in real time. The trays are no longer static inside the racks. They are now being removed in sequence one after another, creating space for new trays to enter, maintaining the continuous rotation that keeps the system alive. As one tray leaves, another takes its place. As one stage ends, another begins. And this is where the system proves that it was never designed to stop, but to flow. The movement becomes more noticeable. Workers or mechanisms lifting trays, sliding them forward, shifting positions, reorganizing the structure without breaking the rhythm of the process. There is no pause between actions. There is no delay between stages. Everything happens in sequence, controlled, deliberate, and repeated. And this is where the visual begins to change. Because as the sprouted rice leaves the growing area, the environment transforms from rows of green trays into a much larger and more active space. Now the destination becomes visible, the feeding area. And this is where the scale increases dramatically. Instead of organized trays, you now see thousands of chickens moving across a wide space, creating a completely different type of motion, one that is less structured, but still highly synchronized. The moment the sprouted rice arrives, the entire environment reacts. The feed is distributed across the ground or feeding lines, and almost instantly, thousands of chickens move toward it, creating a wave of movement that spreads across the entire space. This is not slow or gradual. This is immediate and collective. The entire flock begins feeding at once, heads lowering, bodies shifting, movement overlapping in every direction. The sound changes, the energy changes, the rhythm changes, and suddenly everything that was controlled and quiet becomes active and intense. This is the final destination of the entire process. Every drop of water used in soaking, every hour of growth in the trays, every cycle of irrigation, every adjustment of airflow, all of it leads to this moment, where thousands of chickens are fed at the same time. And as the feeding continues, something else becomes clear. The feed does not last long. It begins to disappear quickly, consumed by the flock, transformed into energy, converted into growth. And this is where the process proves its efficiency, because the system does not produce excess. It produces exactly what is needed. And as one batch is consumed, the next one is already on its way. When you step back and observe everything that has happened, from the first moment the dry grain entered the system to the final moment where thousands of chickens are feeding at the same time, you begin to understand that this is not just a process, but a continuous system where every stage is connected. The soaking stage was not just preparation, it was activation, the moment when the grain began its transformation. The tray system was not just organization, it was the structure that allowed the process to scale. The irrigation cycles were not just watering, they were controlled inputs that maintained growth at the right pace. The airflow was not just ventilation, it was balance, preventing the system from collapsing under its own density. The germination stage was not just growth, it was transformation, turning grain into living feed. And the feeding stage was not just the end, it was the purpose of everything that came before. But even here, at what seems like the final moment, the system does not stop. Because at the exact same time that thousands of chickens are feeding, the process is already restarting somewhere else. New grains are entering the soaking stage. New trays are being filled and aligned. New sprouts are beginning to grow under controlled conditions. And new batches are moving toward the next feeding cycle. This is what makes the system continuous. It does not depend on a single action. It depends on overlapping stages. While one batch is being consumed, another is growing. While one tray is harvested, another is halfway through development. While thousands of chickens are feeding, the next supply is already being prepared. This is what creates scale. This is what creates consistency. This is what allows thousands of chickens to be fed every single day without interruption. And when you look at it from this perspective, the process becomes something more than simple production. It becomes a loop, a continuous flow where every stage feeds into the next. Grain becomes sprout. Sprout becomes feed. Feed becomes energy. Energy becomes growth. And growth sustains the system. And then it starts again, and again, and again. Because the system does not recognize an ending. It only recognizes continuation. And that is what makes it powerful. Because what started as something small and simple becomes part of something large, structured, and constantly moving. And that is how sprouted rice is produced to feed thousands of chickens, not through a single action, but through a continuous system defined by control, repetition, and flow.